Welcome to episode 27 of Leading People with me, Jerry Murray. Have you ever wondered who hired that person when first encountering a new colleague whom you thought really wasn't the right person for the job? Or rolled your eyes when you've seen someone promoted way beyond their ability, the so-called Peter Principle? Or seen a highly talented person fail spectacularly in a new role? Or found yourself dreading going to work, not motivated, not engaged? Or been sent on a training program that was totally irrelevant to your work? Or seeing high performers become low performers after getting a new boss? Of all the investment decisions that organizations make, probably the one that has the least amount of rigor is around people. Yet the amounts invested in people can be quite significant. There's a mountain of research out there to show that there's a real problem when it comes to people decision making. There are very good reasons why these problems exist. They're often based on good intentions, but more often than not, they're the result of unconscious bias and not having the appropriate tools to provide the necessary people insights that are needed. And they're extremely costly. This week's guest is Dr. Dan Harrison, the creator and developer of the Harrison Assessment and Talent Analytics tools. People who discover these tools often refer to them as the best-kept secret in the HR or talent world. Well, now is your chance to discover that there is a robust suite of predictive talent analytics tools out there that will not only reduce the risk of making the wrong talent decisions, but that can also ensure that your talent decisions lead to stronger engagement, better retention, higher performance, growth, and success. So, let's dive right in. Dr. Dan Harrison, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So it's great to have you on the show today, Dan. I believe you're coming in from Thailand, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. So you and I know each other, I suppose, since 2014, actually. It's quite some time. And full disclosure here, I've been working with your tools since then, and they make a huge difference to organizations in terms of decision-making around talent and that. But first, many of our listeners probably don't know who you are and a lot about you. So what I'd like to start with is perhaps give us a little bit of background to how you, today you're running a very successful organization, very much focused on helping organizations make decisions around talent. But I believe you started way back in the early days somewhere in the world of mathematics. So perhaps give us a bit of a potted history of how you got to today, and were there some sort of like epiphany moments or aha moments along the way which sort of led to you taking a direction you took in your career?
Well, originally my focus of education was in mathematics. I had a natural skill for mathematics, and but as I got further and further into mathematics, I started thinking about, well, what can I do with it, and what am I interested in? What would be important to me about a career? And I started to realize that there wasn't really too much that I was really that interested in terms of mathematics as a career is concerned. There's engineering and various things like that, but my father was an engineer, did some work with NASA, and I didn't really want to do that. It wasn't that interesting. So I happened to take a psychology class and really sort of got onto this idea in the class about how humans are really only using a small portion of their capability, which is primarily blocked by the subconscious mind. And that because of the human defense system, we, do all kinds of behaviors and things that are really not productive. And I realized that just from getting exposed to that, I realized that wow, that's probably the most important thing I can think of, that, to have people actually realize their potential and really become more capable of interacting with other people, more better at solving problems and things like that. So that became my sort of love in life, to really understand more about that. And so that's when I started going into the psychology element. I was pretty deep into the mathematics, and that really helped a lot, because I think one of the things that's missing in psychology is it's not very, in most cases, it's not very data formulated. In other words, as soon as you start talking about psychology, you want to know how much something is. What is it, and how much is it? And if you're just talking all quantitative or qualitative in manner, you're never really getting down to how does all this stuff interact with itself. So yeah. I realized that the two actually goes quite well together. So
yeah. So you mentioned the concept of potential, and it's a classic question that comes up: has this person got potential? Can you unpack for our listeners a little bit what is potential? How can we understand it?
Well, I developed what I call 12 paradoxes, and potential is really being able to manage those paradoxes or master those paradoxes. And it's a way of reaching your potential where, first of all, your interactions with others are going to be far more effective. Your achievement is going to be much better. And if you are going into a leadership, your leadership is going to be of a much higher quality. So that's the basic idea of reaching potential. And of course, in doing so, there's a happiness. There's a happiness element. We have people all the time say, "This isn't just for work. This has really helped me on a very personal level, and to really reach a more satisfied and clear state in my life."
So maybe we'll go into a bit more depth with the paradoxes a little bit later on, perhaps for our listeners. They might be going, "What is a paradox, and what are they talking about?" How big a role does context play in a person being able to realize their potential?
Well, context is really impacting the person, but it's how the person deals with whatever context they're in that's critical. And so I personally believe that your potential is in your control. It's ultimately, but the problem with the psychological defense system is that it's on automatic. Mm-hmm. So we have automatic behaviors and automatic responses that are not necessarily the best responses to situations, and therefore, my personal belief is that it's all in your lap. Basically, you have the capability to do it. It's a question that you may have disowned that capability.
Yeah, or as we often find, people's self-awareness level is quite low, probably because they've never been challenged to even become self-aware, or they've just developed patterns of behavior by social conditioning or whatever. And so often what we're finding is people are going, "Really?" And they look at that and they go, "Oh, that explains so much about what's been happening in my life and why I'm so good at so many things, but every so often I bump into something and it isn't so pleasant," right?
Right. So ultimately people have choice, but whenever there's something that's on an automatic pattern, that pattern has preempted your choice. Mm-hmm. And so therefore the pattern is then taking over rather than you choosing to act in certain ways. Mm-hmm. The pattern does the acting. And so that's really where the potential is tied up.
Okay. So before we get into some of those, you've done some amazing work and developed some great tools. But before we get into the tools themselves, I mean, these tools are
as we used to say in Ireland, fine and dandy. But until you can use them for something, that's where they really start to have meaning and impact. So why is talent data so important? I mean, organizations have been gathering data. Finance has had it for years. Go back 25 years ago, sales and marketing had very limited data. It used to be this joke, 50% of your advertising budget is wasted. We just don't know which part. Today, they have great metrics, the web, the track back clicks, and you name it, and they can look at the organization. HR and the people side is sort of trying to run after the bus a little bit, it seems at times. But why is data so important? Whether you're in HR or whether you're just a manager who wants to build a great team around themselves and a big successful organization.
Well, people data is critical because you have to, if you understand the people that you're dealing with, you're going to be much more able to do whatever it is that you're trying to do. So no matter what aspect of the people, it's people who are creating the success of the organization. So it goes right down to, who to hire for which job. Who's going to be passionate about the job, how likely they are to remain in the job, how are you going to interview them, how to convince top talent to work for you, who to promote and how to ensure they'll succeed, how to retain your top talent, how to inspire people to develop, how to turn weaknesses into strengths, how to target and develop and create success. I mean, except all of that is really tied in, and it's pretty much everything that people do in HR. And having people analytics is really a critical aspect to be able to do those things, because how are you going to do it otherwise? You're going to just be guessing at what to do at these various stages of the talent cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would probably challenge anybody listening here who hasn't had the experience, either directly or indirectly, of maybe making a mistake in hiring somebody or putting somebody in the wrong position for them and it going horribly wrong in an organization. Or, as I sometimes found, one of the ways I got into this was by being called in to do a lot of team building. And you'd have managers say to you, well, I've got some great people and I've got some okay people and I've got some people that I've given up hope on. And a question that kept going through my head was, who put them in those jobs in the first place? Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes the person might have said, well, I inherited this team. But even then, they didn't know what to do about them because all they had was a perception that they were forming or hearsay that they'd had coming into the role.
And who's keeping them in the jobs? So from my point of view, people should be passionate about the work that they do. Otherwise, what's the point of being alive? What's the point of working? If you don't enjoy what you're doing, that's the most critical element. So when we're talking about people analytics, we're not just talking about for the benefit of the organization. We're talking about for the benefit of the person as well. If they love what they're doing, it's a completely different experience. So when the manager says, "Well, I've just given up on," well, that's largely because you have the person in the wrong job. That doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the person. It means that there is something wrong with the fit with the person in the job.
Yeah, I could share stories about the revelations that occur when a person is shown a certain respect or acknowledgement of their strengths or even just their core motivators, how it can light them up. That person who was written off can actually turn out to be quite, prove all the perceptions wrong. But I think you've set the scene now for something that's quite probably very relevant. And that is this movement out there, or this movement of thought that has grown up in the last 12 months or so around this concept of the Great Resignation. And we're hearing about the Great Resignation. McKinsey recently wrote an article called The Great Attrition or Great Attraction, The Choice is Yours, and taking that concept of choice that you mentioned. So many people probably, what's happened in the world with COVID has given people quite a big emotional shock. And a lot of people are probably really looking at themselves and what they do for a living and do they enjoy it, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps one of your core concepts that you work with is this enjoyment performance theory. Maybe we can start to unpack that, because it may be organizational leaders out there, and I know some of them are going through restructuring, some of them are trying to figure out how to make hybrid work. We've seen articles in the Harvard Business Review about organizations actually changing job roles to suit the people, so that the people are doing the things that are going to really play to their strength. So maybe you can start to unpack your work and relate it to that, because that topic is very relevant for a lot of people today.
Well, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they look at the business relationship in a one-sided manner. So the organization typically looks at the relationship with employees as, how do we get them to do what we want? And that's very limited, in the sense that the relationship, in truth, is something that has to be a mutual benefit. So in order for the person to really be productive and to really stay, it has to be something that they want as well, and that's important, that they feel passionate about, that they enjoy. And it goes right down to the assessments that people use. Most people use assessments that are really one-sided assessments. The assessment is designed to say, is this person going to be the person that we want? Are they going to do what we want? And, that part is good, but the problem is it's missing something really important, which is this job going to do something that fits this person's ambition, their career, aspirations, their desires to develop, is this job going to give them passion for what they do? And we proved this right in the beginning. One of the first research pieces we did was with in Australia, where we worked with the unemployment department. And they had people who were basically receiving what they call the dole, or unemployment. And they would try to take these people off of the unemployment roles and put them into customer service jobs. And they would just sort of grab people and put them in, and they'd give them some training. And the projects, it would cost them about $20,000 a person to get them in there, give them a little bit of training, and get them started. And they were coming out with, about 19% success rate after 3 months. After
19, you said? 19.
19, yeah, it's really poor. And then I can't remember the exact figures, but after we started getting involved and say, look, you got to get people who are passionate about this job, who are going to actually enjoy working with customers, and have those sort of characteristics that one, make customers happy, but that they're happy dealing with the customers. Mm-hmm. And so we started helping them to select the people who were going to fit that role. And it completely flipped around after they started doing the research afterwards. They were getting like 87, 89% success rate after that, instead of 19. And, it was a major transformation. And the people running the courses would say, like, where are these people coming from? How can this be so different in our course? And it's very simple. You just got people who are, really want to do what you want them to do. And to me, that's the core, aspect of all of it, is unless you have that fit, you really don't have anything to work with. So you've got to get people who want to do what you want them to do. and you can't get people who want to make a living and don't want to do what you want to do, but just want to get a paycheck. That's the case in a lot of cases. And of course, you're going to struggle with those people because they don't really want to be there. Right? So they're putting in their time in order to get a paycheck. And, the truth is we spend a lot of time in our work and our jobs, and just for our own sake and our own sanity and our own great feeling in life, it's essential that we like what we're doing and that we're having fun doing it. Yeah. And so that's the whole key, I think, to the critical element. But you can follow that line of thought all the way through the every process of the talent cycle, including the hiring process, the interviewing process. If you follow that line of thought through it, that is the key thought. So if you have that key thought, you can apply it to pretty much every aspect of human resources. And then you have a pretty big winner there.
Yeah. Yeah, and we might identify a few of more examples and a few of the specific tools in a minute. The other thing that I think people probably need to be aware of is that when people are in jobs that are not satisfying or they're not suited to, their stress levels are going to go up because they're going to be on high alert, right? So we see this. These things seem to be separated out into little silos. So there's stress and burnout. What are we going to do about that? But actually, a lot of that is the root cause of a lot of that comes back to your premise, right?
Right. Well, if you love what you're doing, what's to stress, right? It's probably the best part of your life. In fact, if you love what you're doing, you can be going through all kinds of stuff in your life and survive, because at least you've got a big chunk of your day that's where you're doing something you really enjoy.
And you're going to feel more psychologically safe. You're going to have less of the adrenalines and cortisol's running. You're going to have more of the dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, all that stuff that also makes us more creative, makes us more innovative, gives insights. We make better decisions, don't we, when we're in that zone? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so let's take that now. Let's look at the cycle in a few blocks. So there's getting people into the organization. So you've developed, for example, tools around job success, right? Could you maybe explain a little bit how that works for if anybody out there saying, but how does all this work? We hear about, they've got all these great personality tests and all that. Maybe you'll unpack that for us in a minute about why they're not doing what you can do. But how do these tools, let's get people into an organization. Why, for example, does a personality test not really give you the information you need? The Big Five based personality test versus what you can help somebody understand about the candidate.
Okay. So typically what people mean by personality tests is there's this general set of traits or characteristics that are very general, and that basically, people are put in these categories of personality, and this includes the Big Five as well. And then the hope is that you can somehow apply that to every job that there is out there. But the problem is the research on that is really based on what makes people successful in general. And the real problem with that is what makes people successful in general is quite different than what makes people successful in specific jobs, because there's huge variations depending upon the job. And it's also a one-sided viewpoint. So we're looking at, what are these personality traits? And we usually ask some, relatively tricky questions to try to determine the person's so-called personality. And that already puts people's guard up, and you're more likely to get skewed answers from people who are, answering those things. Whereas if you take a different tack and you just simply have a large array of, what things do you like doing, and what's important to you about employment, you're not only able to glean that same psychological information about their behavior from that, but you're also basing it on what's important to them. And that doesn't get their defenses up. They're much less likely to lie about it, and they're much more less able to lie about it because there's no negative questions being asked. And any negative or counterproductive potential behavior is a result of looking at the combination of their choices. And that gets into the paradox, which we'll talk about later. But so that's the critical element that you're looking for.
Yeah, and you designed a questionnaire that actually at the end creates about 175 data points.
Right.
And you've used an approach which
you have to have them. Yeah. You have to have that many data points because every job is very, very different. And so you need a lot of data points, and they need to be configured differently for every job.
Yeah.
And we do that by collecting a lot of research and looking at the relationship between high performers and low performers in specific jobs. And then we're able to identify the specific factors that relate to high performance and low performance in specific jobs. And I can tell you they're very, very different for the different jobs. And so it's a complete fallacy to think I'm going to then create a set of things that are going to apply, a small set of things that are going to apply to every job. That doesn't exist in nature. And if you do that, you're going to get a pretty low correlation when as far as the results are concerned. And you're going to get much less buy-in. So there's really an important element is you've got to get buy-in from the person. Now, whether you're using it for recruitment or development, they have to feel this is relevant to me and this is important to me. And it has to foster a conversation that's going to be productive in terms of the person's employment and ability to target different, developmental needs as well. And you're just simply not going to get that when you're putting something up and say, this is a personality test, and we're testing your personality. That creates a lot of problems. And of course, psychologists know that,
So some of them still hang on to but I suppose it's this sunk cost fallacy or the confirmation bias where people have been using these other tools for so long that they feel they have to stand by them, and yet there are other ways of getting at this. And one of the things I think if our listeners are kind of trying to figure this out is that, as you say, there might be 170 5 factors in there, but we often are only looking at plus or minus 40 factors because they're tailored to that specific role.
For a specific job. And also the other thing is typically, personality assessments use simple correlations. So they say, it correlates with performance or doesn't, and we'll use it. But actually, there's different types of correlations. So some factors are really different than other factors. So, for example, with some factors, like takes initiative. Well, the more initiative for some jobs, the more initiative you take, the better it is. But for other jobs, you only need to take at least a moderate amount of initiative, and having more initiative doesn't really help. But if you're really lacking initiative, it can hinder. So, and that's a very different type of correlation. And unless you're dealing with those things in that way, and then it becomes a detractor. Yeah. And there's also traits that are detractors as well. So you can't just look at what we call success traits. You have to look at the detractors that can hinder the person's success and satisfaction in the job. Yeah. So and that's a big difference as well in terms of what we do.
In the next part of our conversation, Dan provides examples of how his unique paradox technology works. For example, how the paradoxes explain why your apparent strengths can actually be weaknesses in some contexts, how to predict how someone may behave under stress before you hire them, and how the paradoxes can explain and resolve team conflicts, and much more. But before we return to our conversation, I have a question for you. Do you think you're a good communicator? Let's listen to what Dan has to say.
So give people an example of a detractor trait, because you actually calculate these very cleverly, but just give people an example of one or two detractor traits so they understand.
Well, I'll give it to you. There's two instances. One's a detractor trait, which is lacking. So an example I just gave with initiative. So if you're lacking initiative, that could be a detractor, but it may not be important that you have a great deal of initiative. Okay. And another one was when we look at traits in relationship to each other. So we might look at, for example, the relationship between the person's frankness or directness and the person's diplomacy or tactfulness. And we can then see if the person, for example, tends to be blunt, because the frankness will be strongly outweighing the diplomacy. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes a negative trait, which we call blunt. And in fact, we're able to determine how blunt the person is that way. And the point is, that's a trait that you can't really measure effectively otherwise, because if I simply create a questionnaire that says, how blunt are you? Nobody's going to answer that correctly.
That's right.
If they're looking for a job. And the other way that people generally try to do it is they say, well, if the people are really frank, that means that they're going to be blunt. Well, that's not right either, because they can be very frank and very diplomatic. So it's that ability to look at this sort of what we call paradoxical traits that's really key in getting a good assessment and being able to understand the person's behavior. Because just being frank doesn't necessarily mean you're blunt. And most assessments and most people make that mistake of thinking it that way.
Right. Okay. So we're almost in the paradoxes, but before we get there, I think it's interesting for our listeners to also know that there's one questionnaire that does all of the lifting on this, takes less than half an hour, and it is not the final assessment in the sense that that questionnaire brings in the data that then can be cut and it's like putting different lenses on your camera or whatever, different cropping, and that's a really powerful, unique feature of your work. Is that when somebody most people say, "Well, that was an interesting questionnaire. It's a bit different." And then they go to the results and they go, I've taken lots of, they call them tests sometimes, and yours is not a test because there's no right answer in it. It's just really an assessment. But they come to the end of the process and say, I've taken a lot of assessments in my career, but I've never had one that's so profound and given me so much personal insight. And that's the point about the frankness. Somebody who is overly frank and coming across to others as blunt often doesn't realize it until they see it. And then they go, oh my God, that explains some of the challenges I've been having in my interpersonal interactions. So, So how did you come to design this questionnaire in such a way that it provides so much rich information afterwards?
Well, a lot of this has to do with the work I did in psychology, where we did work in human potential and did a lot of work related to the human psyche. And we used a process we call pondering the opposites. And when you ponder the opposites, you begin to see, be able to see unconscious material or subconscious material. And what happens is most people are stuck in a single, at least some single polarity. And so that would be an example. A person tends to be frank but not diplomatic. What they're really doing is they're saying, I tell the truth. I'm a truth teller, and they're having the self-esteem as being telling it like it is. And what they're not really understanding is that that's really undermining them. And that's creating animosity in their relationships. And yes, of course, it's great to be truthful. It's great to be frank and direct. But if it's not supplemented by diplomacy and tact, it becomes a negative thing. It actually keeps you from having contact with other people, which is what you're trying to do. You're trying to get your point across. You're trying to have a connection with other people. But in truth, if you're lacking the other side, then you're hindering your own goal.
Okay, so let's unpack now. We're in paradox. We've been alluding to it. And then after that, I'd like to get into the whole engagement area about the mutual aspect of that, because this is the time of year when a lot of people might be going through annual appraisals and annual reviews. And we can talk a bit about how your work is so useful in those contexts. But let's first explain to the layman what you mean by a paradox and what you mean by paradoxical traits again. So we've already started to unpack that by taking two traits and contrasting them, but maybe explain a little bit more how you've come to this and how people can understand it and relate to their real lives.
Well, paradox is a statement that has two things in it that appear to be contradictory, but in fact are both true. And that's the critical element, that they're both true. So, for example, less is more. Okay, so that's true. You can think about it in terms of, maybe your PowerPoints, having less, words on the screen is actually more. It actually is better at getting your point across, and it's more effective. Or saying fewer things but having more clarity is better. Okay. Yeah. And so that's a paradox. And paradoxical traits are things where there's two traits that may seem like they could be contradictory, but in fact, they actually support each other and they're synergistic. And so frankness and diplomacy is an example of that, where those two things go together. And when they're put together, it gives a person an especially unique and powerful combination in which they're able to communicate very, very effectively.
gives them versatility, or as one of our colleagues calls it, adaptive capacity, the ability to adapt to situations, right?
Yes, and they're able to sort of resolve, the point of that type of communications is they're able to resolve issues with other people and interact with other people that's, productive, and especially in a work situation. And that's a very powerful thing to be able to do.
Okay. Maybe give us another example of one of the other paradoxes that...
Another example would be being open and reflective, and also being certain of your ideas. So that's things that people struggle with, and I think a lot of people struggle with that around the world now. Is leaning to one side or the other, but the truth is, we're all in a process of learning, and we're all in a process of developing and sort of growing our understanding of what's out there. And we need to come to some conclusions along the way in order to make decisions. However, it's a big mistake to think that those conclusions are a final result, and that other people's conclusions are not, don't have valuable information in it. So we tend to get people who are polarized because the individual is actually polarized. So they tend to polarize against other people. So a person who is both open and reflective and certain, they're able to interact with other people with ideas. They're able to say their ideas. Someone else says something that they don't agree with. Instead of them, bouncing back, getting into a big dispute and argument about it, they'll say something like, well, tell me how you came to that conclusion, and let me understand what your idea is, and how did you get to that idea, which is very, very different than someone who's just going to dig their mind in, what we would call being dogmatic, or people who tend to be more certain than they are open. They tend to be dogmatic. But on the other hand, people who tend to be more open, reflective, and not certain tend to be evasive. So that's also not very productive as well.
Or inconclusive.
Yes. Yeah.
Very good. Now, let's just take the paradoxes a little bit further. So you got these two traits that need each other, really. They don't really function well independently. And we talked about having a situation where perhaps you have an overemphasis on directness and you come across as blunt. We use this phrase, the me that others see. However, there are other consequences to being quite out of balance in these two traits around stress. Can you just explain a little bit what goes on there and how you've been able to help people understand what happens if they're put into stressful situations and they have some out of balance elements in their paradoxes?
Yeah, that's a good example. Like, for example, if you tend to be very diplomatic and not frank, what that means is you'll tend to hold back from saying things that you really need to say, and to be sort of truthful, and you're going to overemphasize being diplomatic. And what happens as a result of that is, under a stressful situation, you'll tend to flip to the opposite. In other words, you'll tend to feel, look, I've been so nice to this person, and now I can't stand it. They keep saying what they're saying, and that's it. I can't take it anymore. And then you become quite rude to the person. And so even the people who tend to normally be very diplomatic can, if they don't have frankness, they're going to flip into the opposite. Whereas if they have frankness, that's going to prevent them from flipping into the opposite, because they will have been doing that all along.
Yeah. And this is where some people often say, I wasn't myself, that wasn't me, right? Or
right.
And other people go, what the hell happened today? Stay out of Dan's way today because he's just in. And yet there's a whole lot of misunderstandings that are created around this, which are unhelpful. And often it's that understanding that trigger point, that stress point, that trigger point that sets somebody off. Right. And recognizing that there's value in having more directness or frankness to help person navigate those situations, right?
Right. Well, stress in itself is going to make any of us more vulnerable to, saying things or doing things that we don't really want to do. But the imbalance itself, in this case, is one of the foundations of creating the stress, right? So because of the imbalance, you're having this buildup of things that you didn't say, and you're holding it back until finally it just blows up.
Yeah. And actually, the paradox measurement there's also a measurement of a person's ability to manage their stress within your paradox.
Correct.
The 12 paradoxes.
Well, there's a measurement of how much stress the person is under chronically. So you actually look at the combination of those two things.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's for people to discover later, I think. The other great thing about this is that the paradoxes can then help in terms of people understanding there are various patterns that emerge, and then when we get to teams can, rather than people in teams kind of, because personality tests will often say you're here and he's there, and that's it. And then you say, well, what do you do? Well, I don't know because I'm now green and he's red, or whatever they're using as the classification.
Right.
The paradox is when they're put into teams do a totally different thing, don't they, for people's self-awareness and how to work together. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is people who have the opposite imbalances tend to fight and have difficulty with each other. So, for example, we have a paradox called risking and analyzes pitfalls. And some people are very strong on the risking, not very strong on analyze pitfalls. I mean, they love to take big risks, and they don't worry about the possible consequences so much. And the other people are much more risk averse. They're high analyze pitfalls, low risking. They want to minimize or eliminate risk as much as possible. And those people are going to fight. Because one person is going to want to do something that's much more risky than the other person, but it's a joint activity, and they have to do something together, and therefore they're going to clash. And what happens in a team situation is people start to realize that this is an internal battle that's going on within themselves, and that their best position is to have both of those things. And then they begin to realize that the other person actually has the thing I need. Whereas previously they tend to demonize the other person. They're saying, oh, this person just holds us back, or this person's just crazy at risk. And so once they understand the paradox, then they're able to see, actually, this person has something I need, and I have something they need. Yeah. How can we then work together to create something that's good?
Right. And the other dynamic that kicks in, because I've done team days with this, is that there'll be people who are more balanced. They have access to both traits, and often they become mentors to the others because they become people who somehow naturally have a sense of navigating both traits. And sometimes I've found that even just going and having lunch with them or having a coffee, going, tell me, how do you deal with that situation, has helped people go, but it's actually possible. Or they look at that person, it's like having the two-footed football player who can kick with both feet. I'm really good with my right foot. The other person going, I'd love to be able to confuse the defender by being able to turn on my left foot instead of my right foot, and they don't know that I can use both feet. And they often look up to that person saying, show me, teach me how you do it.
Well, but now you're talking about the benefits of having the leader of the team mastering the paradox, which is really critical. In fact, from one point of view, you can say mastering paradox is paramount for leaders, because the leader of the team is going to drive the team in different directions. But if the leader of the team is imbalanced, that's going to throw a monkey wrench into everything that happens in the team.
Yeah. And there's some very nice patterns. We won't actually deal with the patterns now because there's some white papers that people can get access to afterwards if they want to understand a little bit more about that. Because I want to get to the engagement. I just want to get to the end now. And one of the things you've done is, tell us. So we get back to this where we started from. Like, if people are not in the right jobs for them, they're not likely to be very motivated. They're probably not very productive, and they're not going to be therefore performing very well. And then we talk about lack of engagement. And organizations spend millions, and the world spends billions on things like employee satisfaction surveys and that. So just explain to our listeners. Okay, those things have a purpose, but what is it about them that you can help people do with your tools, that the missing link that would help and really transform the lives of the people, the employee, and the lives of the manager, and the benefit of the organization?
Right.
In the final part of our conversation, Dan explains why conventional engagement or employee satisfaction surveys don't actually help improve engagement. He elaborates on the two most important factors that underpin successful engagement, what dating can teach us about engagement, why managers dread the annual employee satisfaction survey, and the unintended consequences of making managers solely responsible for engagement. But first, a word from our sponsors. If you work in human resources and you'd like to test out the Harrison tools for free, visit the Wide Circle website at widecircle.eu. That's www.widecircle.eu. If you're a trainer or coach and would like to train in the Harrison tools, then visit paradoxcoaching.co. That's www.paradoxcoaching.co. Links to both websites are in the show notes. Now, back to our conversation.
So there's two things that are important about engagement. The first one is what we've already talked about, is getting the right person in the right job. So getting them in a job that they feel passionate about, that they enjoy doing. That already is a big step for engagement. But there's another very important step, is that every person has expectations for employment. And the problem is those expectations are different. Some people want to have more development opportunities. Some people just want to be able to make, higher pay. Some people are really focused on even having, social connections at work. Everybody has something different that they're looking for. Some people are looking for autonomy. It completely varies. And we have about 18 different things that people want from their work. And part of our engagement is to really, assess and measure how much people want each of those things. And having those be a subject, because as I said, you have to look at employment as a two-way relationship. So the relationship is the company getting what they want from the individual? But the other side is the individual getting what they want from the company? And so in order to have a really good, long-lasting relationship, you need to have both of those elements fit, because a lot of organizations will say, our best people are leaving, how to retain our top talent? Well, you have to retain your top talent by finding out what's important to them. And what things they feel are fulfilled in terms of what's important to them. So there's actually two sets of questions, and by understanding that, you're able to have discourse with people to really work out a mutual benefit. Because people are so confused about employment. They think it's some kind of mother-father relationship or child relationship. It's totally not true. It's a business relationship. And it's a relationship in which you perform certain functions and you get paid for those functions. Those people are not, your employer is not your mother and father. And on the other hand, from the employer's point of view, the employee is not your slave. Okay, they're there. They're not a machine. They're not an asset. Okay, they're a person. They're an individual. Yeah. People say, "Oh, employees are our greatest assets." What are you talking about? They're not assets. They're employees. They're people. They have their own ideas. They have their own needs. They have their own wants. They have their own ambitions. And if you want to have a good relationship with them, you have to work out what those things are. And you have to have a give and take process that deals with the relationship in both directions. That's a business relationship, no different than any kind of relationship you would have with a supplier or a partner or a business partner. You have to look at what works for both parties. Yeah, or a spouse. Yeah.
I mean,
how would you feel if you went on a date and the person at the date starts asking you, questions about, well, this is what I want. I need somebody who does this, this, and this, and this, and this. And they never bother to ask you what you want. I mean, how do you feel?
Well, I think there might be listeners out there already have their own experiences of these things. Hopefully not on the interrogation side of the equation, but I think there's been situations where people have cut those dates short.
Right. Yeah. You probably cut and run, right? Because, but that's what happens when people say, employers say, oh, people are leaving us, well, you know what, it's a good idea if you look and see what you can do to keep that from happening. And what you can do is basically to really acknowledge the relationship and what's important to the other person, and not just give lip service to that, but where you actually measure it, have discussions around it. I mean, we look in the organizations, we have performance reviews. Okay, I'm going to review your performance. Well, wait a minute. Isn't this a two-way relationship? Shouldn't we be looking at how has the organization given the person what they want in the last year? How is it working for them? Do they want something different? A performance review should be a two-way performance review.
Yes. And actually, I've had experience I can share with our listeners of clients using your tools and having better. Those become meetings, they become discussions, dialogue, they become a sharing. It actually, believe it or not, is easier on the manager because they're often feeling, if they've been storing up that list of stuff, actually they can go in there and have a discussion, which is a two-way discussion, and understand the person in front of them better, and the person can understand the manager better. So it's actually, they both come out feeling better.
Yeah, well, otherwise, all you're doing is treating the person like a child, and and you're going to trigger all their childhood reactivity as a result of that.
Yeah, because they're going in with a gun in the back pocket, saying, "The minute you shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back." Right. And
right. And even if they don't say it's going to come out, and then people say, well, why are people having these crazy behaviors at work? Well, yeah, it may be because of that,
Yeah. Now, the other thing that weakens the employee satisfaction world a little bit and these surveys is this anonymity thing. And you've got, I mean, surprise, surprise, there's a myth out there, I think, that okay, there's all sorts of legislation. Let's park that for a minute. But as long as you are complying with data protection, etc., within your company context, and that, there's a myth out there that people won't tell you stuff. And what might surprise
the problem with engagement is, in the way most people are measuring it, is based on assumption. And the assumption is that your manager is responsible for engagement. Right. And even organizations make their manager responsible for engagement. But the truth is, the manager isn't responsible for engagement. It's a mutual thing. The manager can help. But first of all, the manager, if the person isn't in the right job, the engagement is not going to happen, period, to start with. And if there's not mutual discussions based on mutual needs, it's going to be very hard to get that kind of engagement long term anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the assumption. The problem is, once you assume the manager is responsible for engagement, then you start asking questions that are basically having you evaluate your manager, right? And the reason why engagement surveys and things are anonymous is because they're afraid that there's going to be repercussions when the person evaluates their manager, right? And they're right, there would be. But if you take a different tact on it and you think about asking engagement questions that really amounts to what does the person want and how much do they feel like they're getting it, that's not an evaluation of the manager. And therefore, it does not need to be anonymous. You can start having discussion around those things, just like the company can have a discussion around what they want and what's important to them.
Yeah, and I can tell you from experience, just through my acquaintances, a lot of managers dread the or the employee satisfaction survey when the results are being published, because they're praying that they're above the average, right, on that score.
Well,
because if they're not, they're told fix it, but they don't know how to fix it, because they don't know. If you've got a team of 40, 50 people, you don't know where to start.
It puts the manager in a horrible position, because the manager, firstly, one important part of their job is to hold people accountable, right? And so they have to hold people accountable. And at the same time, if you start putting them under that kind of stress and say basically engagement is the manager's responsibility, all you're going to do is to reduce the manager's tendency to hold people accountable, right? Because when they hold people accountable, sometimes those people don't like it. Right. Right. So then all you're really saying to the manager is, we're going to evaluate you based on you having people like you. And that's wrong. That is completely wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And because it's going to have a really unintended consequence, which is the manager is going to say, well, okay, if that's how you're going to evaluate me, I'm not going to hold them as accountable. Right.
No, that's
people accountable.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a situation whereby either people hold back on their true opinions, or they deliver anonymous feedback to a manager, and then the poor manager is lost, and as you say, maybe overcompensates to make sure that they don't upset people coming up to the employee satisfaction survey.
The framing of the questionnaire cannot be around what your manager gives you. That's just completely wrong. It has to be around what are your expectations, and how much do you think they're fulfilled. Because people have different expectations. You can have the same manager, and one person will feel like that manager is being, way too blunt or whatever, and another person will feel like, no, I like it. I like the way the manager talks to me, and it can be very, very different for the different person. So how can you then say, well, it's the manager's problem, right? To work out. But what you can say is, if the manager understands this one person wants much more diplomacy than the other person, it doesn't necessarily mean the manager's bad or wrong. It just means, okay, if the manager's smart, they'll understand that and see, okay, this person tends to be pretty sensitive, and I'll go softly with this person, but still, tell them the truth. But as soon as I start putting pressure on the manager, it's your responsibility to get people engaged. That's the wrong thing to do, because also sometimes managers don't even have the authority to say who they're going to hire, right? So they may get people put under them that have no passion for the job.
And actually, as you talk, Dan, you go back to the paradoxes again, because if I don't have the versatility to be diplomatic, and I have people around me who want diplomacy, I'm going to struggle, and that side of my paradoxical imbalance is going to exacerbate that situation.
Exactly.
And the other thing that might surprise people out there is that you can actually find out people's engagement expectations and whether or not they have. The other thing you do is you have the supporting traits. So it's okay somebody saying, I want development, but if they have a very low inclination towards self-improvement, for example, that creates a certain kind of conversation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So that we also couple what we call expectation factors with supporting behaviors. So that's a very, very good example in which they need to have the self-improvement in order to get that expectation fulfilled.
And you can actually measure this before you hire somebody, because it relates back to the way you've designed the enjoyment, performance, the job fit, right? And you can measure this. And if people are listening out there and saying, no, I don't believe you, I can tell you from experience, people fill this in. it's quite remarkable. They will complete this, and they will also tell you what their fulfillment levels are, even if it's the job that they're leaving. And that tells you something. You get somebody who has very low fulfillment in their expectations in their current job applying for a job versus somebody who has high fulfillment. That will change the dynamic around salary negotiations, a whole lot of things, because one person can't wait to get out of a job. The other person's going, I wouldn't mind working for you. It seems interesting, but I'm actually quite happy where I am. You're going to have, so it's going to be a different kind of conversation taking place there.
Absolutely.
And we're able to help people see that. So that helps that decision-making process before the person enters into the organization.
Right.
So you've built a whole bunch of really great, so starting off in psychology and assessment and working through enjoyment, performance, the job fit, the paradoxes. In the last 18 months, 2 years, you've built a lot of fantastic analytics tools, and just say a little bit about that and what might be coming up in the future, and give our listeners maybe one or two tips or advice on what they could do now to really explore this and start to really think about how they could make better and great talent decisions in 2022.
Well, the biggest thing, and I think is you could say the main theme we've been talking about, the biggest thing is really to understand that employment is a business relationship. And it's a two-way relationship, and both sides need to be satisfied for it to be a long-term and productive relationship. So getting people in the right jobs is the right thing. Looking at mutual expectations is really important. But if you really understand that, you'll do that through the entire process. So, for example, when I give an interview, I use our methodology. And in our methodology, we will look at what's important to the person. And we have an assessment in front of us, so that helps a lot, where we're able to see what's important to them, and we're able to discuss that. And we're able to say, okay, this is the areas where it looks like you might be a really good fit. Tell me more about that. How has this played out in your previous job? So we're able to then get a better sense of what they've done in the past with it as well, and sort of verify our assessment as well. And then, we're building the relationship with the person, because most people take an approach when they're hiring of screening people out. And that's the wrong idea. If you think about it from the viewpoint of a top performer who's likely to be your best candidate, right? To them, they know they're qualified. They know that they probably have multiple job offers. So you should build an interaction with them that's around their needs. But what are their needs? What are they thinking when they come in? They're thinking, am I going to enjoy this job? They're thinking, is this company going to be good for me? Is it going to be a nice place to work? Am I going to be able to fulfill my ambitions for my career at this company? That's what they're thinking. And what we generally do when we're conducting interviews is we do just the opposite. We're totally razor focused on what are they going to give to us? How are we going to make sure they give to us? We're mistrusting. We try to ask them trick questions. Totally the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to build the relationship by really looking at what's important to them. And in that process, be talking also about and being very disclosing about what the job involves and what we're going to expect from the other person. But in that process of discussion, having that happen, that completely changes the dynamics of the interview and turns it into a very productive discussion. And I've had people who write me, after the interview that I did not hire, said, thank you so much. That was so helpful. I feel so empowered from the interview that you gave me, even though you didn't hire me. And I've also had people, where I looked at their fit, and, after going through the process of the interview, I could see, well, actually there wasn't as good a fit as I thought there might be. And And I've suggested to them, look, this, we're probably not good for you. We're probably not a good situation, because what you want is something that's like this. And I suggest you can get this, in another place. And I tell them my suggestion. And they're so happy. They feel like, wow, this was fantastic. I get great reviews from that, people even people that we didn't hire. They said that was such a great experience. Right. And so it's that mental framework that the person has, which is the most important thing. As a recruiter, if you think of yourself as a gatekeeper, then you're making a mistake. But I understand how you might, because you need something that helps you assess that to begin with. So you need a two-way assessment to not be a gatekeeper. But if you have a two-way assessment, you're able to not be a gatekeeper, and you're able to construct your interview in a way that is completely not as a gatekeeper, but as someone who's exploring a mutual potential benefit of business relationship with that other person.
Right. And another thing that's happening recently, where the data analytics, where you're able to look collectively at groups of people and at the culture of an organization, is a lot of organizations are starting, I'm hearing more and more, we're restructuring, we're reorganizing, we're coming out of COVID. The hybrid thing is contributing to that. But what do they do, right? They go and they start restructuring it, and then they say, could you assess? Right. We want to put these people in those jobs. And so what happens is we become a kind of an insurance policy. It's like, we'll do the risk, the sort of due diligence for you. Whereas actually the opportunity is missed, because actually if they started off saying, who have we got? And where can we best make those people into roles where they're going to perform?
Where are they going to be their most productive selves? The truth is, it's easy to change organizational structure. It's a lot harder to change people's behavior patterns.
But organizations
you can do it, but it takes time.
Well, organizations don't change; people change, and actually, people may not need to change dramatically if you understand them better. And that's where the data analytics, I think, are going to help people, help decision makers make those better decisions.
Well, it's also very important to tell you where the organization is struggling. So, where are your engagement levels low? Where is their poor job fits in the organization? Understanding that is just key to be able to say, then what do we do about it?
Okay. So, Dan, I'll put some links in the show notes. Can people connect with you on LinkedIn or anywhere like that?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. Yes.
Okay, great. And so, for what would you suggest people should do now, having listened to this, if they're interested?
They can contact us anywhere in the world. We're in 70 different countries, and they can contact us, and we'll have somebody give them a demonstration of what we do, and they can then actually take a bite of the apple and have experience of how it could help them.
Yeah, and that's the first important thing, is to just test this out for themselves, try it out for themselves to find out, does it help them improve their insights and decision-making around people they have, and take it from there. Mm-hmm. So, Dan, it's been a fascinating conversation. Like I've heard you talk many times over the years, and I've still really enjoyed this. I hope our listeners got some really valuable nuggets of insight and advice and wisdom here from you today. So I'd like to thank you once again for being my guest.
My pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. You will find details of what we covered in the show with links, etc. in the show notes. Please share your key takeaways from today's guest and let your friends and colleagues know about the podcast. Oh, and if there's a particular author or leading thinker you'd like me to interview, just get in touch and I'll do my best to get them on the show. This episode was brought to you by Wide Circle, helping you make better talent decisions. To learn more, visit widecircle.eu. That's WIDECIRCLE.eu. Until next time.